We can begin. Again, we want to welcome you to our very special series of webinars, which is designed exclusively for you, our closest friends and supporters. Today, we are quite excited to have a return visit. I'm going to ask whoever to please mute. Thank you. But today we are really quite excited to have a return visit from our man in Jerusalem, Rabbi Matt Berkowitz. And he is the JTS director of our Israel programs. And also we have another very special guest, Dani, who is the deputy director of the JTS Shokin Library in Jerusalem. And Dani will be revealing to us some of the rare treasures that are in the Shokin Library at JTS in Jerusalem. So we are really, really in for a treat. And of course, Matt will be offering his teaching on Psalm 126. We will be happy to take your questions in a few different spots. First, after Dani's presentation, please write questions in a chat to me and I will read them to Dani. And then after Dani's presentation, we will hear from Matt and his teaching on the Psalm. And after his presentation, you're welcome to either send a question in a chat, or you can also raise your hand icon in the lower portion of your screen in the participants panel. And of course, remember to keep yourselves on mute during the presentation. And now, live from the JTS Shokin Library in Jerusalem, Rabbi Matt Berkowitz and Dani Hacker. Welcome, guys.
Thank you so much, Joan, for that very, very warm introduction. It's my great privilege this evening in Jerusalem to say to all of you, Bruchim Habayim, welcome to Jerusalem and welcome to the JTS campus in Israel, the JTS Shokin Institute Library. Greetings from the main lecture hall here at the heart of the Shokin building on Balfour Street. In fact, we're right across the street from the Prime Minister's residence. And for the past 10 years, this space that I'm sitting in has been the home of our rabbinical and cantorial students in Israel. The building itself is a historical landmark in Jerusalem with fascinating and emotional history that we'll touch on tonight. Zalman Shokin, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be for a blessing, was a very successful department store owner in Germany, with department stores all over the country. And in addition to being a successful businessman, he had amassed a spectacular collection of rare Hebrew books and manuscripts. You see part of that collection behind me. Between 1934 and 1937, Zalman Shokin, with the help of a number of associates, smuggled his rare bookroom collection out of Nazi Germany by way of South Africa and brought that collection here in Israel. During those same years, he commissioned the Bauhaus architect Eric Mendelsohn and built this building as a refuge for that book collection. He never had any intention of living here in this space. In fact, his residence was about a block and a half away from here on the other side of the current Prime Minister's residence. This building was solely meant to be a shelter for the treasures that he collected. So I want to just give you a brief sense of the space in which I am sitting. You see some of those rare books and manuscripts behind me. I am surrounded by books and manuscripts in this main lecture hall, which is at the heart of our building. Here you see Leavenwood bookcases. That collection continues behind these bookcases. You see vitrines from the 1930s. And in fact, all of the fixtures and building material out of Germany. It was in 1933 that he was stripped of German citizenship. And in 1934, he came to Israel. The building has some very characteristic designs of Eric Mendelsohn. Right now, I'm standing at the top of the staircase in the Shokin building. This is a very, very typical staircase of Eric Mendelsohn's. And for those of you who have been to the Weitzman residence, this will look quite familiar. There are many elements of the building that remind you of the Weitzman residence and other buildings that Eric Mendelsohn designed. If you're interested in some of the fascinating history behind this building and the story of Eric Mendelsohn, I want to highly recommend a very special book that came out about 5 years ago, Till We Have Built Jerusalem, Architects of a New City, which showcases about 3 or 4 architects that left their mark on the city of Jerusalem. It's written by Adina Hoffman, highly recommended. You can order this book from Amazon. And one of the chapters is devoted to Eric Mendelsohn, and we, the Shokin Library and Building, are featured in this book. So without further ado, I want to hand this over to Dani Hacker. Dani is my assistant here at the Shokin building, and in addition to being my assistant, he is truly the jewel in the crown of our program here in Jerusalem. Dani has exceptional breadth of knowledge on the collection, and he is going to give us a beautiful introduction that will segue very, very nicely into our learning of Psalm 126 tonight. Dani?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Matt, and thank you, Joan and Naiza. And today we're going to talk about not really a rare book, but it is a treasure of this collection. And after Rabbi Matt's introduction, I want to say a few words about Shokin, and I'm going to share my screen with you. 1 second. Okay. Okay, so few words about Zalman Shokin, just to add to what Matt said before. Zalman Shokin was not born to a rich family, and when he was 14 years old, his father took him out of school and he sent him to become an apprentice to learn a job. And from that moment on, really he became self-taught. And the way that he did that is by reading books. And this is the beginning of a very special relationship between him and books. And after several years where Shokin really didn't have any connection with his Jewish heritage and Jewish culture, in 1906, he comes by a book by Martin Buber. It's a famous book. It's The Tales of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, a book that becomes very influential for German Jews. And when he reads that book, he realizes there is much more to Jewish life than halakha. There's a rich Jewish culture. And at that moment, he starts coming back to his Jewish culture. And I want to show you just one. This is a quote from a letter that he wrote to Martin Buber in 1913. He says, "Many years ago, I was strongly influenced by your book on Rabbi Nachman. Ever since, I have been following your work with great admiration. Ever since that moment, I have become a true Jew again." Like Matt said, Shokin was a very rich man, and he made his money from opening a chain of department stores. And with that money comes great influence. And by 1914, he was involved with the Zionist movement. And he actually sat as the head of the culture committee of the Zionist movement. And as that role, they were thinking about publishing books with a great notion, with a great idea in mind, that many of the Jews living in Germany do not really have any connection with their history and with the Jewish culture. And therefore, we need to publish books that will help them connect to their history and their culture. We have to publish new material and material that looks modern and not has a taste of old ideas. So after several years sitting in that committee, he really got frustrated by all of the committee's progress, and he decided to open his own publishing house, the Schocken Verlag, the Schocken Publishing House in Germany. And I want to, these are two main workers, the two menahalim, the two of the publishing house, and that's Moritz Spitzer, as a Jew, Moshe Spitzer, and Lambert Schneider, who was a German. And I don't think this is an accident. This shows both sides of Schocken, who was really very much connected to his Jewish heritage, but also very much connected to the German culture. And just, I don't know if you can see the right side of the screen, but just some dates of the publishing house. 1931, Schocken opens the publishing house. And then in 1933, he opens a series of books called the Schocken Library. In German, it's the Schocken Bucherei. Actually, the idea behind that series is to create affordable books. All of them are designed the same from the outside. They look the same, and in a moment I'll show you what the series looks like. And it encompasses every imaginable aspect of Jewish culture, from the Bible through medieval poetry to Shai Agnon, Martin Buber, Franz Rosenzweig, and others. And in 1934, like Matt says, Schocken moves to Israel, maybe to some surprise of his friends. And then he opens a publishing house in Israel in 1937, and the publishing house closes in the end of 1938. So very close to the beginning of the Second World War. This is the Schocken Bucherei, and you can see that all the book looks the same from the outside, different colors, but the same format. The idea was to publish 2 books a month, and they ended up publishing 92 volumes between the year of 1933 and 1938. And it was extremely popular. Most of the books were published in 2 editions or 3 editions, and there was a very large crowd of people, German Jews, who were not necessarily religious, but who were academic in nature. And they all bought the books. And like I said, it looked the same from the outside, but a lot of attention was given to each and every book to have his own identity. Here you can see, I'll go through this quickly because here you can see a couple of examples, printing with Hebrew and German and some color, different types of material. Again, here you can see from the Passover Haggadah that they published. And we need to think about it and appreciate the fact that they were able to do this so beautifully with such great design, such clean design. It's not like today where we can choose from many hundreds of fonts on our word processor. At that time, there were very few places that printed Hebrew in Europe, and a lot of attention was given to every little detail, especially in this kind of book where Hebrew and German are printed on the same page. These are some of the people who worked with Schocken in the publishing house, but especially in the Schocken Library: Martin Buber, Shai Agnon, Gershom Scholem, some of the great writers and minds of the 20th century. And this is a book that I want to talk to you about today. It's called Out of the Depths I Call You, O Lord, from Tehillim. 23 Psalms translated into German by Martin Buber. This is the 51st volume of the series of the Schocken Library, and it was printed in 1936. There's a little history behind this book, and this is also connected to Zalman Schocken. In 1925, Martin Buber and Franz Rosenzweig start a project to retranslate the Bible into German. And they call it Die Schrift, or scripture. And there's two main objectives that I want to achieve by doing this, by doing a new translation, not based on the German, the Luther translation of the Bible, but really a new translation. And the main reason is to make the Bible accessible to Jews living in Germany. But not only Jews, they mean also German, but it becomes apparent that it's Jewish people who are interested in this translation. So how do we reconnect modern readers with the biblical text? By 1921, when Rosenzweig dies, 10 volumes are completed. In 1938, that's when Buber leaves Europe and comes to Israel. And by then, he completes another 5 volumes. At this point, basically most of the Bible is translated. Only some of the Megillot and Divrei Hayamim are left. But Buber does not finish this project, not until 1961. And we're not going to get into that, but it's a very interesting story why it takes him so long. And here's one quote that I want to share with you from an introduction from Buber writing on the translation. Can we build a bridge above the chasm between the people of our generation and the scripture? And how can we achieve, I'm sorry, I can't see that. How can we achieve that? When we say scripture, do we mean a book? We mean a voice. Do we propose that people must learn to read, or that people must learn to listen? So as a part of this series, Buber translates Tehillim to German. He doesn't call it Psalmen, he calls it Preisungen. This is songs of praise. And from that book, they choose 23 Psalms and publish them in the Schocken Library with the Hebrew original, as you can see before you. And what's important to notice here is the way that the text is presented. It was very important for Buber that this text would be vocalized, not just as a block of text. And we might be used to see this in Tehillim, but this is what they did, not only for Tehillim, they did this also for all of the other books in the Bible, that they published with the rows, with the lines, almost suggesting a way to read it out loud. So now we have to look at another side of this whole project and endeavor that the Schocken Publishing House, and that is some of the events that are happening between the two world wars. Because in the 30s in Germany, obviously it wasn't easy for a Jew to maintain a business or a publishing house. And I want to hear just a couple of dates. There are obviously a lot more things happening in those years, but if you can see, 1932 is when the Nazi Party wins the election. And in 1933, Joseph Goebbels organizes book burnings, and tens of thousands of books are burned in Berlin. And in 1935, we might talk about this a little later, German officials, the Nazi officials, stopped the printing of Kafka in Schocken's publishing house. In 1937, every Jewish publishing house must write on the outside of the book so everyone can see it's not that it's a jüdischer Buchverlag. It's a Jewish publishing house, and that has to be written outside so the Germans would know not to buy that. And then obviously 1939 is when the Second World War begins. And some of this affects, you can see it in the publishing house. Show some examples. For example, volume 68 of the Schocken Library series was a book called the Judenbuch, the Jewish book, written by a woman named Annette von Dorste-Holzhoff. Now, Annette obviously is not a Jewish name. And by that time, in 1937, Jewish publishers were not allowed to publish books by non-Jews. It was forbidden for non-Jewish people to publish their books in a Jewish publishing house. So the Nazi censors make the Schocken publishing house call back that book and replace it with the book you can see on the right here by Fischl Schneerson. That might be the most Jewish name. And they call back the first book and replace it with another one. The other example I want to show you is from the Almanach, from the yearbook. Usually yearbooks in publishing house are sort of advertisement for the book that are going to come out this next year. But with the Schocken publishing house in Germany, the yearbook was almost like a periodical. There was new material commissioned and written for this yearbooks, and they were highly popular. They were sold out and printed in several editions. And this is the last one printed in probably August of 1938. So very close to the beginning of the war. And this is for the year 1938-39. And what happens is, because there's so many people, so many German Jews reading the books of the Schocken Publishing House and starting to understand what it means to be a Jew, what is the Jewish culture through that publishing house, this also becomes a way for the people at the Schocken Publishing House to send messages to the German Jews. And what they do is they send it sort of under the nose of the Nazi censorship. And the way to do it is, this is a great example. In the Almanach for the year 1938-39, which obviously you can see it's a Schocken Verlag, Jüdischer Buchverlag, like I said, you must write it everywhere. So no German would, by mistake, buy a Jewish book. And in one of the first pages, it's page 6 of this yearbook, we can see this poem, Piyut, by the poet Yanai, who lived in the 5th and 6th century in Israel. And it's called Bihiyot Tsar Verodef. And here's the translation of it. When our enemy persecutes us, pursues and advances, the desert closes and the sea rages. In our woe we remember thee. From our sorrow we call for thee. We look for thou in the distance and find you nearby. Now, for German officials who look at this piyut, it might look like a very naive 5th or 6th century poem. But it was clear to everyone, every Jew who read this, that this is saying something about the condition, about the politics, about the situation in Germany. And also, this Tehillim, this little book with 23 Psalms, it's not called out of the depths, I call you, O Lord, naively. It's very, very meaningful. And it's not And I want to take a look at what Buber writes in the foreword of this book, just about why he chose this specific 23 Psalms, and he chose them in a specific order. And I'll just read it. The Psalms speak in two voices, the individual and the nation. Even the most personal psalm cannot be perceived as individual alone. And the voice of the nation, the we, is so immediate that when one experiences the historical as biographical. It is not a question of either or, but of multiplicity. The selection in this volume represents the natural progression of human life. It starts with the cry for help, realizing man's frailty. It then asks for an answer, a dialogue with God. The question is not, why do I suffer, but why have you forsaken me? Will we ever receive God's grace again? In the midst of despair and devastation is the waking dream of a newly built Zion. Understanding the mystery of history, that when everyone stood against us, he was there. The suffering becomes an action of planting in tears, reaping with joy. The psalm is human voice. At any time when the faithful have vanished from among men, it speaks anew our strength, our weakness, and our strength. So this is just a very short introduction, just to speak about how sometimes we look at books that were published 90 years ago. They seem very naive, and we don't know the story behind them. And dwelling into this group of extraordinary people who worked in terrible conditions with great values and ideals. What they wanted is to spread Jewish culture, Jewish literature as much as possible. And they kept doing it up until the end of 1938. Moritz Spitzer stayed in Germany up until October 1938. And he wanted to leave months before, but Schocken told him, you have to stay. We have to keep doing this. This is something important that we're doing, publishing this book. So we're going to keep doing it as long as we can, as long as we possibly can. And by October of that year, Spitzer told him, this is it. We can't stay any longer. And he manages to take some of the stocks of the publishing house and send them to Israel along himself. He moved to Israel as well in that time. But most of the stocks and most of these books were lost in Germany during the war. So this is the story of this small book today. And so, just to tell you something about who this man, Zalman Schocken, was, some pathway to the enterprises of this individual. So Matt, back to you.
I'm wondering if anybody has any questions for Dani? I don't see anything. Maybe later after they digest all the information.
That's it. I am absolutely positive those questions are bubbling up.
They are.
So as you think of questions on Dani's presentation, please feel free to write them into chat, and we'll have another moment in which we pause to take questions. I want to thank Dani for that extremely insightful and engaging presentation. And truly, it gives you a taste of the riches that we have here in the Schocken collection. I want to say that on your next trip to Israel, you all have a personal invitation to come here and experience the riches. Dani is truly an expert on what we have sitting in this treasury, and we would be happy to pull out some of our most precious possessions to share with you. It would be our great privilege. Part of what Dani was showing you in presenting these very, very special books that were published by Zalman Shoken with the inspiration of Martin Buber is that truly the goal of this series was to inject self-esteem in a downtrodden people, in a persecuted people. And not just any persecuted people, I'm talking about our people, the Jewish people, right? As they were on the cusp of genocidal destruction, right? Think of how remarkable, lo haya nes katan, it wasn't a small miracle, that Zalman Shoken made it his business, right, to give Jews a sense of pride, to realize that persecution, what they were going through in Nazi Germany, was not going to be the end, right? They had to remember their glorious past. And that was truly the goal of what it is that Zalman Shoken tried to do in this series. And as Dani showed you too, it was so beautifully done, so beautifully published in the typical Yeki spirit, in the typical German Jewish spirit, with such remarkable attention to detail. One cannot help but be impressed. And of course, you heard the words of Martin Buber in his introduction to the volume on Psalms, and it was as if Buber is speaking to us today, especially when he says that the book of Psalms is not just the voice of the individual, but also you hear the voice of the nation and the history of the people Israel. And it's that history that becomes part of our collective memory. Indeed, he used the word biography. It becomes our own biography. So with that, I want to transition into a close reading of a psalm that I believe is familiar to just about all of us sitting in this virtual Beit Midrash. That is Psalm 126, otherwise known as Shir HaMalot, the psalm that is sung before Birkat Hamazon when we're celebrating on festivals or on Shabbatot, right? And this is the introductory psalm that leads into the blessing after the meal. I want to say as I begin this teaching that it is perfect to read this psalm on the heels of the holiday of Shavuot, which we just celebrated, in which we commemorated receiving Torah at Mount Sinai. And part of that tradition of celebrating Shavuot was also the reading of Megillat Ruth, the scroll of Ruth. The story of Ruth opens in the midst of chaos and famine, another dark time for the Israelites in the period of Judges. Naomi's family flees from Bethlehem to stay Moab, to the plains of Moab. And eventually, Naomi makes her way back to her home in Bethlehem when she hears the famine has ended. And once she arrives back in Beit Lechem, she makes this declaration. Ani melea halachti v'rekam heshivani Adonai. I left Bethlehem full, that is, full with family, full with riches, and I have returned here empty. I begin there with this image of emptiness and riches, wholeness, as it were, because that in so many ways represents the arc of Jewish history between exile and return. Naomi and her family are forced into exile as a result of a famine that hits the land, as a result of political chaos in the land. Right? We're all too familiar with this pattern of exile and return, and those indeed are the poles of Jewish history. That strikes at the heart of Psalm 126 that we're about to take a look at. I want to read through the psalm in its entirety, and then we're going to take apart the psalm piece by piece. So first, let's take a look at the whole psalm. I'm sure some of you will feel the urge to be singing this. I begin with the first half in Hebrew. Shir hamalot bishuv Adonai et shivat Zion hayinu kecholmim. Az yemale schok pinu, ushonenu rina. Az yomru vagoyim, higdil Adonai la'asot im ele, higdil Adonai la'asot imanu, hayinu semechim. A song of ascents. When the Lord restores the fortunes of Zion, we see it as in a dream. Our mouths shall be filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. Then shall they say among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord will do great things for us, and we shall rejoice. And the second half of the psalm in Hebrew and then English, Shuva Adonai et shivitenu ka'afikim ba'negev, hazorim bedima berina yitzoru, haloch yelech uvacho, nose meshech hazara, bo yavo virina nose alumotav. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like water courses in the Negev. They who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. Though he goes along weeping, carrying the seed bag, he shall come back with songs of joy, carrying his sheaves. First of all, in terms of the overall structure of the psalm, you see that the psalm itself is divided into two parts. The first part of the psalm, which is comprised by verses 1 through 3, is an expression of thanks for the glorious past. And then we turn to the second half of the psalm, verses 4 through 6, and that is a prayer for the future. Part of what we have to understand in terms of the background of Psalm 126 is that it is part of a group of 15 psalms. Psalms chapter 120 to chapter 134. It comprises a set of psalms that is known as Shirei HaMa'alot, the songs of ascent. Right? You notice how Psalm 126 begins in that way, opens with that title, Shir HaMa'alot. As I said, it's one of 15 psalms. This happens to be the 7th of the 15 psalms. Both tractates of the Talmud, Sukkah and Midot, refer to 15 steps that existed, literal steps. It's reminding me of the staircase in the Shokin building that I showed you earlier. So those tractates of the Talmud talk about 15 steps that existed between one part of the temple and another part of the temple. What was called the Ezrat Yisrael, right, the area of Israel, and Ezrat Nashim, the area of the women. It was believed that the Levites would stand on each step, would literally ascend each step accompanied by musical instruments, and would sing each of these psalms step by step as they went up the 15 steps. Right? So that's one theory of how it is that we situate this particular psalm historically. Some also say that it refers to the exiles who recited this as they came back from Babylonia. Just to remind you quickly of our history, right? Remember that the first temple is built in about 1000 BCE by King Solomon. In 587 BCE, that first temple is destroyed by the Babylonians. And then in 540 BCE, Cyrus of Persia conquers the Babylonians and allows the Jews to come back to the land of Israel to rebuild. Right? That is the start of the rebuilding of the Second Temple. Another theory is that this was a psalm that was recited as part of the Shalosh Regalim. It was recited as part of the pilgrimage that took place on the 3 festivals. Remember the 3 festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. We call them Shalosh Regalim. You hear the Hebrew word that is connected to Regalim. We translate Regalim as festivals, but it really comes from Regal, meaning leg, because Israelites were told to make pilgrimage to the city of Jerusalem on each of those festivals. Right? That's why they're called the Shalosh Regalim. right? Let's call them, right, the three pilgrimage festivals, or the three walking festivals. Another possibility is that these songs were songs of praise. Hama'alot, not of steps, but they were songs that were filled with praise. Even another theory attributes the word ma'alot to the idea of synonyms, that perhaps it's an ancient Hebrew word that means synonyms. And what we see in each of these 15 Psalms is every single one of them has a word that repeats itself over and over and over again, what we call a milah mancha, a repeating word that we see that is somehow driving home the particular theme of that psalm. You'll notice that the word that repeats itself in the particular psalm that we're looking at here, Psalm 126, is return. Shuv, shivat, shuva, shivitenu. Like you hear that word of return repeated over and over and over again. And just to reinforce that connection to the holiday that we just celebrated, right? What is the story of Ruth about? Right? It's both about exile, leaving the land of Israel, but just as important, it's about being able to return home. It's about being able to return to one's glorious past, to one's glorious home. Let's read together the first verse in Song of Ascents. When the Lord restores the fortunes of Zion, we see it as in a dream. In the Hebrew, it says, Hayinu kecholmim. Not that we see it as in a dream, but rather that we were like dreamers, right? It's talking about a time in which we were restored, which we were able to come back to Zion. Zion, we know in biblical Hebrew, is a synonym of Jerusalem, which becomes symbolic of the land of Israel. So on our return to the land of Israel, we were like dreamers. That's one of the reasons that a number of scholars situate this psalm sometime around 540 BCE, when Cyrus of Persia allows the Jews to come back to the land of Israel. In verse 2, Az yemale schok pinu ushonenu rina. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. What does this remind us of when we hear our mouth filled with laughter? We think of our foremother, Sarah, when she was given the news that she would bear a child, that she would bear Yitzchak, and indeed, Isaac's name is, right, he will laugh, right? Sarah laughs. Sarah is so deeply filled with joy, right, that the one who is empty, right, is becoming full. That, right, here she thought, right, impossible at her age to become pregnant. She becomes pregnant and gives birth to one of our forefathers, Yitzchak, right? So immediately that notion of schok, of laughter filling our mouths, brings us back to that image of Sarah rejoicing, right? And we were singing songs of joy. Then we read, then shall they say among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. I don't know that the Hebrew is as positive as the English translation. I always like to say that every translation is a commentary. You always have to read a translation, right, with your antenna up, right, with great nuance. The Hebrew says, Az yomru vagoyim, that they said amongst the nations, Higdil Adonai la'asot im eleh. Right? Look at what the Lord has done for Eleh, for these people. In other words, look at what the Lord has done for these downtrodden people. This can be interpreted as having been said in a belittling way. Right? Look at what God did for this insignificant people. But what do the Israelites do with this critique, with this withering criticism? They take the critique, the withering criticism, and they turn around and say, Higdil Adonai la'asot imanu, hayinu simechim. The Lord will do great things for us. Indeed, the Lord has done great things for us. Right? God has worked miracles with us. right? And it is not a curse, as the nations say, but rather it is a great bracha, it is a blessing. So what will we do? We will rejoice. Hayinu semechin. We will be happy. We are happy. That line, Hayinu semechin, we are happy, is parallel to Hayinu kecholmin. First, we're like dreamers in our return to the land of Israel, but then after, the reality hits us. The reality touches us deeply. I want to say, as we're reading this, and my mind is racing back to everything that Dani taught us before about Shokin, and I'm thinking of this rich history. The title of this session is Planting in Tears, Reaping with Joy. And when you think about where it is that Zalman Shokin came from, right, there he was, right, planting in tears. In 1934, he comes to the land of Israel, and all I could think is, Hayinu kecholmin. He must have been like a dreamer at that point in his life, that he was saved from, right, the genocide that was just around the corner. He comes to the promised land, he comes to the land of Israel, pre-state, of course, right? And the other people, of course, that I keep thinking of is the generation that came here, right, in the years leading up to the founding of the state, 46, 47, 48, when the state is founded. Truly, our ancestors must have been like dreamers, right? And then slowly, of course, reality hits, right? They begin to realize not only the bracha that they received in coming here, but also the challenges ahead. The second half of the psalm, we're taking a look at verse 4 now. Shuva Adonai et shivitenu. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, ka'afikim ba'negev, like the water courses in the Negev. Rather than water courses, I'm going to make it a little more vivid, like the flood waters in the Negev. Okay, who knows about the flood waters in the Negev? Right, this is something that I keep my ear attuned to every winter in Israel. I turn on the radio first thing in the morning. At 6 a.m., you should know that the first thing that you hear on the radio is the Shema. It's the reading of the Shema in the first paragraph. And then after that, we get a snapshot of the news of the day, and of course, the weather report. If we hear that there's going to be flooding in the Dead Sea area, I can assure you that what it means is that there's going to be torrential rains in the city of Jerusalem. And whenever it rains torrentially, powerfully in the city of Jerusalem, those waters head down because of the topography of Israel. They head down toward the Judean desert, toward the Dead Sea region, toward the Negev, right? And pitom, very, very suddenly, right, there is major, major flooding, not only in the Dead Sea area, but also in the Negev desert. Right? In the spring and in the summer, one of the favorite pastimes of Israelis is to go out hiking and to walk in these dry wadis, these dry riverbeds. Right? I can assure you, you do not want to be walking in one of these riverbeds just before it rains in the winter. Right? Out of nowhere, the floods burst forth. If you want to take a look at dramatic images of this after class, go to YouTube and type in floods Dead Sea area or floods Negev, and you will see images of this. You will see videos of hikers that happen to be there, right? And thank God they were situated in a safe place, but these floods come out of nowhere, rushing waters that almost look like Niagara Falls as they pound through with great strength. But of course, even with the potential of destruction that these floods have, they also bring blessing to the land of Israel. So as we read this verse, one of the questions that we have in mind is, does the verse refer to bringing life back to the desolate land of Israel? Or life as in waters that come in the winter, that bring greenery, that bring produce to the land of Israel, that make the land itself fertile? Or does it refer to the people Israel as they come back, right? And it's a wish, it becomes a metaphor or simile that the people of Israel, the Jews, should come back to the land, and they should come back with the same power, they should come back with the same force, they should return just like the flood waters of the Negev, suddenly, dramatically repopulating a desolate land. Finally, the psalm closes, though he goes along weeping, carrying the seed bag, he shall come back with songs of joy, carrying his sheaves. Haloch hazorim bedima, right? Those who sow in tears, birina yitzaru, will reap in joy. Haloch yelech uvacho, nose meshech hazara, bo yavo verina, nose alumotav. Right? We shall come back with songs of joy, carrying our sheaves. Right? The image of sowing in tears and reaping in joy is a powerful one, and especially one that we want to keep near our heart and at our fingertips at this time. Right? We spoke about one very, very dark time for our people. Right? The darkest time for the Jewish people, for the Israelites, all throughout history, the annihilation of 6 million of us in the Shoah. Right? We are living through another period of darkness and chaos, politically, environmentally, great challenges in front of us. Right? It's very, very difficult to not, right, read a newspaper, turn on the news today, right, and find yourself weeping, right? Find yourself incredibly depressed by the challenges that humanity is facing today on so many different levels. But what is the important piece of this? Right? Birina yitzoru, right? That we will reap with songs of joy. It's remembering, right, that this is not simply an ending. We do not simply wallow in our sorrows, in our misery. Right? One of the great brachot of the Jewish people, with all of the challenges that we have faced throughout history, that we have faced throughout the founding of the State of Israel, the 72 years of the miracle of the State of Israel, is that no matter what challenge it is that we are facing day to day, right, we know well that we will get through it, right? A very, very famous line that we hear often in Israel, Gam ze ya'avor, this too will pass. Not only will it pass, but we know that it will also bring happiness with us. Right? Zalman Shokin and Martin Buber were not people of hopelessness, right? They were not people of despair. Had they been people of despair, they would never have published, right, all of Tanakh translated into the German language, nor would they have published this whole series of books to give Jews self-esteem, right? To give us a sense of hope for the future. They knew well that around the corner, we would one day again be reaping with joy. And so we come back to Israel. We find ourselves at the finish line of this psalm, singing with songs of joy and carrying sheaves with us. Right? Again, it's taking us back to the imagery of the book of Ruth, right? The agricultural imagery. Ruth goes out into the fields to glean, to sustain her mother-in-law, Naomi. Right? Ruth knew that she had to be proactive when they got back to Beit Lechem, and she had to be the giver of life in the midst of great challenges. And so to us, this is a time that we need to find the wherewithal within each of us, the gumption within each of us, go out into the field, right? Gather, right, those sheaves, right, and bring them back with great joy, right? Let us all go out and do acts of kindness. Let us all go out and do acts of tikkun olam. And remember, shir hama'alot. Truly, It's a song of ascents, and not just a sense of the past, talking about temple times, biblical times. It's talking about us today. As Martin Buber says, this is our biography. This is our story. Let's make this a piece of who we are. Joan?
Amen, Matt. We did have a couple of questions. Diane Schotterman, did you want to ask? I think it was meant for Dani, or?
Okay, no?
Unmute, Diane.
¿En dónde?
Okay?
Yes.
Can you hear? Okay. First, I want you to know it has been such a privilege to listen to each one of you. I'm really overwhelmed. I have to say that. So I had some simple questions. I was very interested to find out if any of these were ever written in Yiddish, if Shokin ever, because it seems like the German, of course, would be for the elite, but the Yiddish would have been for perhaps the people in certain ways. I'm just curious if so, because I live in Long Meadow, and the Yiddish Book Center is near me. And I was curious whether there really were any Shokin books in Yiddish.
No.
Nothing. Okay. I know Russia, would be the Yiddish thing. The other thing was.
I want to answer that a bit more
Dani, before you answer that, I just want to point out that Harold Jacobson is the one that answered no. And Harold is our resident German Jew in the Beit Midrash. Right? I just needed to point that out.
Sorry, I didn't see I was unmuted.
Well, what I want to say is, speaking from his own biography, Shokin was, like I said, almost disconnected from his Jewish heritage. So he was a German in his mind before he came back to Judaism. And the people that he saw in front of him as a group that needed to be brought back into Jewish life and culture was those of German Jews. So his audience were mainly German readers. The other thing is that alongside the German publishing house, Shokin was very interested in renewing Hebrew literature, and his relationship with Shai Agnon, very interesting, very special relationship, was the other side of that coin. And that was the other path. And the first book published in the Shokin Publishing House was actually Shai Agnon in Hebrew in 4 volumes. And Yiddish, he didn't publish in Yiddish, but it's interesting to say that the only sort of academic paper that he wrote, and he published this in one of his yearbooks, one of the Shokin Almanach, was about early Yiddish prints from the 16th and 17th century. So he wasn't really discouraging of Yiddish language, but at that time, people who spoke Yiddish were very much connected to their Jewish culture and heritage, and they were not the public that he was speaking to.
Thank you. And the other question was, knowing how the Psalms spoke to Sharansky, got him through, I wondered whether or not he has come, and if you've met with him and shown him what is here.
I haven't met with Sharansky, and I think we'll talk about it a little next week. Psalms hold a very special place in Jewish history and in Jewish culture. And it's very, like the quote that I gave from Buber, that he says, Psalms is a voice. It's a very direct voice. And so unlike most of the books in the Bible, it speaks directly, it's poetry. So every group in history, next week, I hope we're going to talk about the first printing of Tehillim, which is in Italy in 1477. And I think that we'll talk about it next week. It's also not a coincidence that they choose to print Tehillim, because it holds a very special place. And so it's not surprising that Sharansky, and perhaps other people from the Russian held the Tehillim as a special place.
My last comment is when you talk about like dreamers, I think of Yossi Klein Halevi's book, where the 67 War, and it's titled, Like Dreamers. So again, over and over, history kind of comes along, showing us the way.
I love
Thank
that image, Diane, and I kept thinking of it as I kept reading it as well. I want you to know, by the way, Yossi Klein Halevi has been a guest here at the Shokin Institute a number of times. And in fact, one of our beloved JTS donors made a decision to give Yossi's book, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbors, to our rabbinical students that come to Israel. And so as part of that initiative, Yossi comes to speak, engage in dialogue with our students, and he's one of the highlights of the year. I think the world of him. He's one of my teachers. He's been on the faculty at JTS. So I appreciate that you mentioned him. And Diane, I also want to say to you, please send love to Josh. Here we are sitting in a virtual Beit Midrash, and I sat in a real Beit Midrash with Josh at Pardes, 1993, 1994. So about 27 years ago, we learned together.
And you'd be happy to know that all my children are Jewish educators, so something worked.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Diane.
Diane, thank you. Any other questions before we sign off for this week? Somebody who is, I don't know.
Larry from Jacksonville.
Yes. I found it interesting in the Hebrew, it says, Haloch Yelech and Vo Yavo. I mean, it seems like an emphasis. Is it just poetic, or is it more an emphasis like he will? This is like a bit of determination rather than not just Yelech and Yavo. It's sort of like a command that this will happen.
Exactly. It's precisely what you're pointing out, Larry. It's emphatic, right? It's underscoring this sense of movement, right? He will go, right? He will surely go. That's the idea behind this, that this will surely happen, and it will surely, come to fruition. That's exactly what the psalm is conveying here.
Well, if there are no other questions, I just want to say we are grateful to you, Matt and Dani, for today. As Diane said, it really was a privilege. And with the key word being return from the psalm today, you are going to be returning to us next week, same time, for another teaching on a psalm we all know pretty well, Psalm 23. So I thank you, and I thank you all for joining, and please come back next week at 12:30. Have a good week.
Shkoach, Rabbi Berkowitz. Thank you, Joan. Good seeing you.
Thank you all.
Thank you
again, Matt. Thanks, Dani. Thank you.
for being here with us in Jerusalem. So great having you all.
Yeah, same here. Bye-bye. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Diane.
Shabbat shalom, right?
Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure. Great to see you, Marilyn.
Rabbi, good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Aiden.
Long time.
Please send love.
I will. You're well?
Great.
Good.
Doing super. Yes, as well as can be in the midst of these crazy times.
Of course.
Ah, Rabbi Bray.
How do you do? Very good session. Great session, and give our love to Nadja. And we're very good. It's good to see your face. Really wonderful.
Good to see you. Good to be here in person, Joe and Erica.
Good to see you.
My teacher from the seminary.
Oh.
Very nice.
Good to see you, Matt.
The finest rabbi that JTS ever ordained, Rabbi Joe.
My best teacher they have ever ordained.
You exaggerate, but very nice. Thanks. So we'll see you next week.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.
Great to see you all.
Bye, Matt and Dani. Thank you.
Aiden, Sherry, take care. Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye, Marilyn. Bye, Joan. Thank you, Naisa.
See you next week. Thank you.